rise up in the morning beneath the stars so bright. Pull your hat down, make sure your cinch is tight. Horses kinda snuffy, cold chill up your spine. Go get your ass moving, son, we're burning daylight.
Howdy there, I'm Matt McKinley and we're burning daylight.
In the saddle till the job's done right.
Welcome to Burnin' Daylight, the only podcast for the working cowboy. Well, howdy there, daylight burners. Happy Monday. Hope your weekend treated you good. I had a good weekend. Can't complain too much. It wasn't warm, but we had some sunny weather, and shit's kind of starting to dry out, so that's helpful. It's I don't know, makes a guy in a better mood when the weather's nice, you know. It just helps out a little bit. Everybody seems to have a little bit better outlook on life when the sun's shining. So, anyways, I've been thinking about this series that I want to do for a while, and the good thing is I can go as deep into it as I want, and it could be a long series, but I don't think it needs to be. I'm going to cover a couple different periods of it, but all in all, I think the main point I want to get across on this look at the history of the meatpacking industry in the U.S. is America was truly built on beef, and it was like some of our biggest cities, and it also kind of gives you a little window into the future of some of these meatpacking towns that they're kind of little podunk nowhere towns. But if you look at the traditional meatpacking centers of the United States, they all kind of started as little podunk nowhere towns, and turns out that people just really like beef. It's a good way to get good protein, but also from an economic and efficiency standpoint. In a time of war, the beef cattle provides you with the most amount of meat. then you know, there's buffalo and whatnot. It's one. Maybe I'll look into that during this whole process when we move forward into a different episode in this series. But it makes you wonder why they I don't know. The buffalo also has a lot of meat compared to the relative size. They're big animals, a cow and a buffalo, the cow in particular, but they also have like a ton of muscle on them. There's a lot of meat on a beef cow, and a buffalo's not too different from that. I would imagine. I don't know what the yield you get on your average bison carcass, but anyhow, so if you look at some of these different centers throughout history, they kind of sprang up because they were providing meat to a war effort, and and actually kind of most of them in the 1800s and the early 1900s, and then technology changed, and it kind of decentralized the. Well, not even decentralized. It moved them to a different centralized location. But the story of the meatpacking industry has always been one of monopolization, and it started out as a bunch of whole different smaller different entities, and then they eventually consolidated into into these giant conglomerates, which we see now, and what we saw in the late 1800s when we finally when the first antitrust type legislation went through to break up monopolies. And the meatpacking industry was only one leg of that deal. I mean, there was the oil, there was the mining. Um, there's any number during the Gilded Age that produced these type of monopolies, but the meatpacking industry kind of it hits near and dear because we raise the animals that go through it, but we're pretty disconnected here in the rural world, and for I guess for good reason. We're when you grow food for others, you typically have a pretty close relationship with the whole circle of life. You raise your plants and your animals to be consumed by by other animals, and a lot of times that meant you butchered your own animals. You slaughtered your own animals. You butchered your own meat to get by, and then the excess, whether it be animals or meat, whatever you sold, and that's kind of how you made your living. But you provided for your family first with your crops, whether it be livestock or or a plant, wheat, produce, whatever it is. But you're very keenly aware of where your food comes from and how to get it and what the work that goes into it. Um, you're very in touch with that. And then when you sell that off, there becomes a little bit of a disconnect from the producer to the buyer, and the buyer knows they need it. They need food, but a lot of times they don't understand what goes on, and a lot of times they don't. I feel like, well, most of us here in the agricultural world feel like they don't have the correct amount of respect for what goes into putting that on their plate, and I agree with that a lot. But who's to blame for that? That's a story and an argument for a different day. But there's and this is just going from kind of what I've been at it about 2 hours, a little over 2 hours of looking into the history of the meat packing industry, and just this considered an intro episode. But there's a pretty clear pattern of how these packing industries come about. First of all, it comes from influx of population. So in order for the meat packing industry to thrive and not just be, a bunch of people butchering their own beef, or, like small like community-based slaughterhouses, there has to be another industry that, unless, even so, there has to be another industry driving this huge demand for beef in particular. This is, I'm gonna, we'll kind of throw pork in there. Poultry is a whole different animal in and of itself. That could be a whole different series, apart from the. Yeah, we'll even get into the lamb a little bit, but the two big ones are pork and beef. That's and throughout the history of it, it started, 1662, I believe, was the first one. What was that fella's name? William Pinchon. Pynchon. Pinchon. Pinchon. He's a Brit, so it wouldn't be Pinchon. It'd be Pinchon. I guess he died in 1662. but he essentially is kind of credited with the godfather, if you will, of the American meat packing industry. He was a fur trader and just an overall kind of entrepreneur business had a sense for business, and he was credited with kind of the founder godfather of the American meat packing industry when he started processing a bunch of pigs and salting them and smoking them and exporting it to the West Indies, so the Caribbean area, to be used down on those sugar plantations and whatnot. And that all happened at Springfield, Massachusetts. And let's see, he was born in 1590 and died in 1662, so he's 72 years old. I would imagine the bulk of his deal was in like that 1620 area, 1620 to probably 1640, because it said he retired to England at some point, a wealthy man. 1640, I guess, is when Springfield was officially renamed. So he was right on the edge of Massachusetts and Connecticut. I'm not sure how that works in the map. Those states are like this big. I guess they were big land masses at the time, but yeah, I think my home county, Baca County, maybe has 5,000 people in it. Maybe. It's roughly the size. Just the county is the size of the state of Connecticut. So he had settled and made this little trading post on the edge of Massachusetts and Connecticut. And it was funny is because of the laws and how they did their economics in Massachusetts Bay Colony. That's he eventually annexed his land into the Massachusetts Bay as opposed to the Connecticut colony. It was because it was a more of a free market approach in the Massachusetts Bay. So one of the earliest accounts of like a guy just voting with his feet here in America. It's like, nah. It's the great part about America is like, if you don't like how this particular state does something, there's a lot of other places to choose from, and you can just pick up and go. The amount of wealth you have before you leave kind of plays a big factor into where you go and how successful you'll be when you get there. But the fact remains is like, if you have the will, you can just up and go somewhere. And back then, where you could just like, we're not part of you anymore. Fuck you, Connecticut. We're part of Massachusetts Bay Colony now. And a lot of that had to do with how the economics ran. But anyway, he he set up one of the or I guess the first meatpacking firm in the United States, where like that was their business, and they exported a bunch of salt pork to the West Indies. And then you fast forward to the time of the Revolution, and let's see, let me find that. And Boston, and then later Philadelphia became kind of the hub of the meatpacking industry in the United States, or in the colonies at the time. But Brighton Cattle Market was in Boston, founded in mid-1776. So you could honestly say that beef is more American than apple pie. I don't ever recall hearing about an apple pie market in Boston, but Brighton Cattle Market was founded in mid-1776 when Jonathan Winship, first and second, father and son, put out a call to the farmers of Middlesex County, urging them to slaughter their cattle and sending the resulting meat supply to the village of Little Cambridge, later named Brighton, to help provision General Washington's soldiers. So I mentioned it briefly before, but some of the biggest booms in the meatpacking industry came around war because fighting is the ultimate thing that you do. Yeah, that's what brings an end to a war is the fight. But in order to keep up the fight, you have to feed an army. And most of the men that comprise your army are guys that would normally be out there raising the food, processing the food, shipping the food, the teamsters, all of that, your truck drivers, just your skilled, your average like laborer is who gets thrown into the army when war comes about. Uh, and because of that, you have to find a way to feed them. And one of the ways that America has been able to build their status as a world power is not just being the one of the most powerful, or the most powerful military in the world, not even close second, but there for a while we were one of the premier military powers in the world, but also like we were one of the premier agriculture countries in the world. We still are, but less and less of a focus is being put on that. But it was not only our weapons and men that helped turn the tide of World War One, but it was also the fact that we were able to supply food to these countries that were fighting World War One, while while we were we were sitting back. We were making all the shit for them to win, but also we were feeding their army. And that's if you don't have food for your army, you don't have an army. Eventually that army just falls in on itself and they desert, or they starve to death. And so, and it's one of the reasons why why the North was able to win the Civil War. We'll get into that a little bit later, but here we'll go back to Brighton cattle industry. So this is the Brighton cattle market. So British had just evacuated Boston, and the Army of New England, which was then headquartered in and around the liberated city, was in desperate need of provisions of all kind. The Winship family, who held a contract from the U.S. government to supply meat for the army, soon realized that there's more money to be made from doing the slaughtering themselves, which of course necessitated the establishment of a local slaughterhouse. So you got all these fighting men. They're fighting their ass off. They just liberated Boston, and if I remember right, that Boston gets recaptured later on. But they got to find a way to feed these. So like they just kick the British out of the city, but they can only hold it as long as the army holds up. And for the army to hold up, they got to be well fed, or at least decently enough fed to keep fighting. The cattle and slaughtering trades, launched in 1776, quickly reformed the sleepy agricultural village of Little Cambridge into a thriving commercial center. The selling and butchering of cattle became the economic mainstay of the town for more than a century, profoundly influencing virtually every aspect of Brighton's social, political, and economic, political, and social development. And that's kind of the pattern throughout. If you look at all of these packings. So Cincinnati, one that maybe you don't think of quite as much, but it used to be called Porkopolis because they were right on the Ohio River, and they had access into New England and the Appalachian region. They had good farm ground, and they had a lot of hogs. And then they set up these plants there, and it was, at I guess, kind of the beginning of the Industrial Revolution, and things started to speed up. Like, the more technology increased, I mean, you'd like they always give Eli Whitney the credit for kind of spurring the Industrial Revolution here in the United States, and that's a fair assessment. But I really think that the meat packing industry doesn't get enough credit. And as as a cowboy, aspiring rancher and whatnot, I understand how nasty the meat packing business is, and like they're not great people. And I don't know if they ever have been, but when you come when you just sit back and look at it, it's a really impressive deal what they've been able to do, what we've been able to do here in the United States with with the production of meat, and it's all spurred from a strong meat packing industry. So without the meat packing industry that we have, that has grown to what it is today, we don't have the cattle industry that has grown to what it is today. It's a very symbiotic relationship, and with that, like there's a lot of competing interests, and we see that over the years, and essentially, and as much as Bill Bullard didn't want to admit it, these trade associations are essentially unions, where you don't have factory employees as members, but you have ranchers as members. Uh, and so even though they may have a different legal distinction and what they can do, essentially the National Cattlemen's Beef Association, RCAF, U.S. Cattlemen's Associations, they're essentially different unions for the rancher. Um, and and it's really really funny, and interesting how all those different characters intertwine. And but at the end of the day, it's a very very symbiotic relationship. Without the rancher, the packer's not in business. That could be changing with the advent of this lab grown meat shit. Who knows that? But in the meantime, without the cattle, there is no packer. Also, without the packer, the cattle don't have anywhere to go, and so like both sides have to rely upon each other, and it's once you get into that industrialized model where like you're operating at scale, it's a lot harder for like your average worker to have any power, and your average rancher to have any power. Like once you sell those cattle, like you don't have any control of what happens to them after that, unless you have it in your contract. You don't have much say, you know, and that's where the trade associations come in. That's where the labor unions come in, and there's a very rich history of all of the labor movement, and and the where with the range wars, and all the way now to where we're kind of at the same point in an economic standpoint. We're kind of in the same situation as they were back in the like late 1800s, early 1900s with the big four packers. Now or big five. Now we got big four, and it's funny and interesting to just follow the path of this whole combined industry, and when you compare that with different other industries, I think the one that really comes closest to mirroring, being a mirror image, or like not mirror image, but like being the most similar is the energy industry, because it's kind of a life and death type deal. Eventually, it's whoever controls the food, whoever controls the industry, they control the people. That's how it pans out. And whether there's a sinister plot at the top of it, it's a compelling argument to think that there is. But whether that's true or not, that's how it plays out. If you don't have energy and you don't have food, you don't have much going for you. So it's and it's funny how the rise and fall of all these urban centers, a lot of them are not just it there's a lot of factors that go into play, the location and like waterways, roads, whatever, ports. But for whatever reason, it made them a good place of business. They were kind of built on the back of beef cattle, like, and some to a lesser extent pork, and regional variety for sure. The New England states were a lot more known for their cattle than the southern states, where they were known for pork. And then the western states were built on the beef cow, which was driven by demand from the northeastern states. And it was all kind of built on the back of the beef cow. And if you look, like, there's a meat packing district in most of your major cities, but like New York is a huge shining example. And I didn't look up too much in San Francisco, but I bet it's kind of right along the same lines. But New York is a place known for importing and exporting a lot of stuff. They're right there on the coast. They're known to be a center of commerce, but also New York State's is known for agriculture. Not like, if you're not from there in the New England area, I guess you probably don't know as much about it. I know I didn't, but yeah, once you get outside of New York City, and then you get your main urban areas within New York. You got Albany and Buffalo and whatnot, and they're industrial towns, but the rest of the state is agriculture, and that goes to say for most of every other state in the country. There's even the little bitty states like New Jersey, Massachusetts. I don't know so much about Connecticut. I think they're mostly urban, but I would bet you once you get off the beaten path a little bit, there's some farm country even in Connecticut. And so, like, all these states have their urban areas, and then they have everything else that supplies the urban area, even going way back when. So New York was the obvious place to ship all your stuff out, being on the coast, and also at you had the East River and the Hudson River, and I think there's another one there. I'm not for sure, but at least those the two big rivers, as well as the Atlantic Ocean. Like, it's a perfect place to buy, sell, and trade shit. And you had this whole area of New York City that it was always known as a trading post, but as and I think New York more so during the Civil War as opposed to Boston during the Revolutionary War. New York became kind of a meatpacking hub because they're supplying food to the Union troops during the Civil War. And at one point, the meatpacking district, and it's only, I don't know, a handful of city blocks. I forget exactly what the distance is, but there was 250 meatpacking plants and slaughterhouses all in this little area. And the funny thing about the meatpacking industry is it's not very glamorous. And as we get further into this series, we'll delve into like The Jungle by Upton Sinclair, and some of the just like heinous conditions that used to be in these early meatpacking plants, and even through today. Like, if you follow some headlines, especially here recently, there's been several headlines of these contractor companies that come in and clean the plants, employing some very, very young people, like sometimes young as like 12 years old, which I don't necessarily have a problem with, but if I was sending my kid to go wash out one of these huge packing plants in say Garden City or Amarillo or Greeley, wherever, if I was to allow my kid to go get a job doing that, like, man, I would I'd be locked up for child labor laws. But if you just import them from Guatemala and they don't technically work for the packing plant themselves, they're uh, contract labor, well, maybe people turn a blind eye. And so there's been several instances of that, but that's always been the case throughout the history of this country. Is the people that, by and large, the people that work at these packing plants are low skilled immigrant labor, like first generation. Back in the day, it was Irish and Italian and German and Scandinavian immigrants, and then that later translated to the black. They weren't necessarily immigrants, but they were migrants moving from the south into the Midwest and the north to these industrial cities. And then from there, it went from like Mexico, Guatemala, Honduras, and then like Garden City, Kansas got a pretty strong Vietnamese population because they came over to work in the packing plants. And now, if you live in or near one of these packing towns, there's a lot of Somalian immigrants, and it's all and all of these people typically come from kind of war torn areas. Like back in the day, there was war throughout all the Papal States, which is now Italy, Prussia, and France, and England, and Germany. Prussia essentially became Germany. All throughout the 1800s, constant warfare through there, and led to a lot of refugees. Russia and German always had a disputed border. Not so much in the 20th century, which we'll see here soon. Also, part of the reason I bring this up, because there's a big war looming on the horizon, and man, we don't know what like government intervention is just quite yet. We got a little taste of it with COVID, but when you go into like World War II and when you go into war rationings, and it damn near that with the war, the Depression, the Dust Bowl, all of that compounded, like it almost broke the beef industry in the U.S. and it damn near did break the sheep industry. Particularly, we sent so much mutton over to the troops in Europe and the Pacific during World War II that the fighting men just got tired of eating the shit, and a lot of them came home and they never ate another bite of lamb in their life, and that had a huge, profound impact on the sheep industry here in the United States, and all of it's all intertwined, and then you add the immigrant labor, particularly coming over from Europe back in the day, like Marxism and socialism, and all spawned in Germany, but it spread throughout Europe, and with good reason. When you look at the working conditions back in those days, it was not hard to see why your average factory worker, meatpacking plant worker, steel mill worker, whatever, in wherever you worked in these industrial environments, you were routinely taken advantage of. You look at the company towns in the coal mining sector. Just the company owned anything and everything, and you didn't even get paid in real money. You got paid in company scrip, which only could be used at the company store, and to pay your rent for the company house that you lived in, and to pay the tuition at the company school that your kids went to. And yeah, and then if you even thought about asking for better conditions, they just fired you. And when they fired you, they kicked you out of your house. They took all the company owned stuff. And by the way, you were in the middle of fucking West Virginia, and it was like a 3 days walk to the nearest city. So good luck, and think about that next time you want to speak up. And so it was not real hard to see why socialism, Marxism, really took hold in Europe, and then later in these not even just the urban centers, but like I said, West Virginia, all throughout the Rust Belt of the Appalachian region, and these packing towns throughout the Midwest. It was it was just, I guess, a continuation of the old class struggle, but with little different circumstances. Instead of lords and serfs and kings and whatnot, you had the government, but you had the giant companies. I don't know at the time that if they weren't necessarily corporations, but they were organized as trusts, and it vertically integrated the industry. Like the railroad industry, the steamline industry, the packing plant industry, and then the more technology grew, and the more these companies became intertwined with government, like the more and more you had the growth of these monopolies, and it's happened over and over and over throughout the years. Um, but it seems like maybe the packing industry is one of the only one of those industries that keeps getting put at the forefront of it over and over again. But it's one of those things that it's one of those industries that no matter how much it changes and technology increases, people still have to eat. So they're always there. And so like they may get hit with some antitrust stuff, and they get broke up a little bit and blah blah, but they always come back, and they'll find you'll find out like a war is a good way for them to really sink their claws back in and start building back towards an oligopoly, a monopoly, whatever you want to call it, but centralizing stuff. And it seems like it never fails. Whenever you've got to feed a large amount of men that can't produce for themselves because they're fighting other men who can't produce for themselves at the time being, that's when you get a lot of consolidation, and you see these big like start to emerge, or they consolidate even more power. And I think we're on the verge of that now. And so it's kind of funny to me that Garden City, Kansas may be a booming metropolis here within like the next 10, 20 years. Like it's not an ideal place for a city, really, but it's a really ideal place for a packing plant. It's you got Highway 50, you got whatever the other highway is, like a big junction of Highway 87. There's a junction there, and you're kind of midway between, say, I-40 and I-70. It's it's kind of conveniently located, so it's, even though it's a little bit off the beaten path, it's not very far to major thoroughfares, and you got a lot of cattle, and it's already established there. If they keep building, and man, the amount that Garden City has grown in my lifetime is pretty tremendous. Like it's kind of it's well on its way to being like like a small to mid-sized city. I mean, I don't know how many people they have there now, but it just keeps growing, and you can see it. You could see it growing even more, just the way the consolidation of the packing industry happens, and it, it's uh it's a really crazy story when you start to get into to all the little details and how everything grew, like from Cincinnati, well, from Boston and Philadelphia being the hubs, New York being another hub, and then branching as the country moved farther west, and how uh, we're here. I had one here. The first cattle drive in the U.S. Was in 1779. Um, Came all the way from Texas in 1776. American colonists declared their independence from Great Britain, and the American Revolution began. It was well known that France came to the aid of the American colonists in their fight against the British. Less well known is Spain's involvement in the American Revolution and how it led to the first Texas cattle drive. Great Britain's land. Eager to reclaim their land and push the British out, Spain eventually officially joined the American Revolution in 1779. That year, the Spanish governor of Louisiana, Bernardo de Galvez, supported the Americans by sending 2,000 barrels of gunpowder and lead clothing to George Washington. To feed the Okay, so he also engaged troops. He and his troops engaged the British armies in battles from Baton Rouge to the Bahamas. To feed the Spanish troops engaged in the American Revolution, Galvez asked for support from the neighboring Texas in form of Texas cattle. In these letters from 1779, the commanding general of New Spain gives permission to drive 2,000 head of cattle from Texas to Louisiana. Records indicate the cattle were purchased from ranches connected to missions, but there's no evidence that the cattle arrived in Louisiana. So whether the cattle drive actually happened, the Spanish government still put out the order for it, and it's just it's funny. Like I said, when you've got to feed a large amount of people, cattle's kind of the way to go to it, and all these hubs were based around feeding a new population, and they eventually they migrated from the East Coast to more the center of the country, where there was a lot better ground to grow these animals, and then get them to the railhead, and then eventually like that part didn't even come to matter, because now you can take a semi way up the top of a fucking mountain, and as long as you got a set of corrals there, or a place where you can put some portable corrals, and you can get cattle there, and you can get the truck in there, you can ship them right out, and within sometime, depends on how far you're going, but usually within a couple days at the maximum, you can get them to slaughter wherever you want to, and that's that, or to the feedlot. Uh, and then leaving the plant, they can get these animals processed down to where they fit in a cube of a box, and then on a refrigerated truck they can go anywhere, and then even from there you can go from the middle of the country to a port, whether the Gulf of Mexico, the Pacific, or the Atlantic, but you can drive a truck from Garden City, Kansas to any one of those locations, and put it in a shipping container, refrigerated shipping container, and ship it anywhere in the world nowadays. And that was something you couldn't do before. And how that all has played out today, it's kind of fascinating. And when you see this big gear up for war, you kind of have to look at where the packing industry is located, and it's like Amarillo, Texas, western Colorado, eastern Kansas, Nebraska, and I wouldn't be surprised to see a even bigger influx of immigrant labor because who works at the packing plants? A bunch of poor immigrants. That's how that's how it always works. It seems like there's, uh, I don't know, like if anybody knows, your average white dude or gal that works at a packing plant anymore, let me know because I'm sure there's a few of you out there, but not many. It's kind of like working at a dairy. Like if you're a white dude working at a dairy, you're probably in management somewhere. You ain't you know working the milking parlor. And there's, I don't know. I guess long story short, before there was another couple stories I wanted to highlight, but I think they fit in better in a later episode. But it's really interesting how it all plays together, and when you look at all the struggles between the different characters involved, whether it's you know your assembly line worker, which originally was called the de-assembly line because you were taking a full carcass and de-assembling it. That's the motivation for Henry Ford to create his assembly line in the motor industry, in the automobile industry. He took his inspiration from the packing plants and how everybody had a stationary job and you just worked on products as they came by you. So like if your job was to cut this steak, you just waited until the chunk of meat came to you and then you cut it. And then the next one came and that was your job all day long. And it was a very efficient process, and he took note of that and created the assembly line automobile plant, which revolutionized a whole different industry. And it just, I guess at the end of the day, it goes back to show you that no matter how removed we get from our food as a country and as a culture, this whole country was built on the back of beef, and it will be for the foreseeable future. So, when you hear these guys talking about like these incredible prices coming up on cattle and how low we are on numbers, like it's a concern. It is a concern, but it seems like this was a pretty good winter. So, like, if you got a chance to restock, probably better do it. I think if there's a chance to maybe get ahead a little bit, it'll be these coming years because cattle prices are gonna be gonna be pretty high, and I bet the demand's gonna be right there because, knock on wood, I hope I'm wrong, but I think we're going to war, and we're going to be sending a lot of beef products over to troops, whether they're ours or another allied army. I don't know what, or both, but there's going to be demand for it. And like I had spoke before on investing in defense contractor stocks and getting jobs at a bomb factory or whatever. I think the same thing can go to say for having some sort of job in the meat cycle, whether you're raising the animal or you're working in the plant or some job in between, or say like a leather factory. That used to be a huge thing where used to just have the slaughterhouses. They'd kill the animal and skin it, and then you'd send it to the butcher. And then you also had the guys that took the hides and they made leather products, and then that all kind of became consolidated and vertically integrated. But I think anything around food and guns here in the next probably, I don't know how many years, but for the foreseeable future, that'd probably be a pretty safe industry to be involved in because We're going to need a lot of it. But anyhow, I'm going to, this next episode, we'll cover some of the very early days, probably from the founding of the country as colonies all the way up to, say, Civil War and shortly after. That'll be the next episode. And then we get into the real meat of the meatpacking industry once the labor movement gets involved, and we hit our stride in the Gilded Age. That's going to be a fun one. But in the meantime, that's going to take a little bit to research. I think it is good to recognize as whether you cowboy for a living, whether you raise cattle or you just take care of them, it is a good thing to note that as big of a bunch of bastards these packers are, and how they're going to try to just gut you at every chance, and get one over you. It still is a symbiotic relationship. We got to have them. They got to have us. And it's kind of like when they finally realized in the Cold War that the Soviet Union wasn't going anywhere and we're just going to have to learn to live together. It's kind of how I feel about the packing industry. So, as much as we hate them, I don't want to run a damn packing plant. So, we got to figure out how to make that relationship as good as possible. So, anyways, maybe I'll come up with some ideas that won't amount to shit. But it's always good to look into this stuff and I guess more than anything, learn what you don't actually know. You know, sometimes you only know what you know, and then the more you look into something, you realize how much you don't know, and then you can start looking into like how do you make that better. So, anyways, I hope that all made sense. I hope you guys have a wonderful week. Thanks again for tuning in. We had some good numbers this past week, so anybody new to the show, welcome, and enjoy the shit show. If you're not already signed up, please go to patreon.com/BurninDaylight. It's the best way to support the show. That, and go to bubsnaturals.com if you like collagen, you like MCT oil, and they've got a bunch of other supplements that are good for you, all natural stuff, good company, gives back to charity, and they also pay me pretty decent when you buy stuff. So head over there, bubsnaturals.com, promo code BurninDaylight, get you 20% off. So check that out and move your ass. We're burning daylight.
Your eyes up in the morning, beneath the stars so bright. Pull your hat down, make sure your cinch is tight. Horses kinda snuffy, cold chill up your spine. We'll get your ass moving, son, we're burning daylight. Burning daylight. Burning daylight. In the saddle till the job's done right. Just together, and you won't catch 'em all. But when you ride through the gate, make sure you sit up tall. I can see the horizon, it's looking pretty bright. Well, get your ass moving, son, we're burning daylight. Burning daylight. Burning daylight. In the saddle till the job's done right.